Has the Fortnite World Cup changed the face of eSports?
And can the ACCC really moderate Google or Facebook's power? Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by CASA Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market. Welcome to Vertical Hold, behind the tech news, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined by Alex Kidman, a man who's in training for the Bubble Bobble World Cup due to be held in his lounge room this summer. Alex, how are preparations going for the opening ceremony?
Look, I don't want to give away too much too early. I can say this will be like no opening ceremony you've ever seen, with contestants getting that authentic 80s arcade vibe by being served a lukewarm bowling alley hot dog just before they start playing, ensuring that at around level 32, they'll get that interesting tummy rumble, and I should be able to take home the gold for Australia.
Sweet. Looking forward to it. Speaking of World Cups, we've got Seamus Byrne from Byteside here, who's fresh off the plane from the Fortnite World Cup in New York. Seamus, how's the jet lag treating you?
You know what? I've come up with some good strategies. I've done a lot of esports related travel over the last year, and I've taken to the idea of pulling an all nighter before I get on the plane, and then my brain is so fried that I sleep. So that is my strategy, and I'm feeling pretty good today. So it's still working so far.
Yeah, that's pretty much my strategy too. Stay up too late, drink too much, crash on the plane. Not literally, obviously, and let's not freak anybody out.
Yes.
So Seamus obviously has joined us to talk about the Fortnite World Cup, and we'll dive into the ACCC's digital platforms report and what that might mean for the likes of Google and Facebook. But first, over to the tech news desk. Alex, what's new in tech?
Telstra CEO Andy Penn has joined the chorus of ISPs calling for NBN Co to drop its CVC pricing, claiming that it's impossible for ISPs to make any money as things stand. Penn wants CVC pricing to go, along with around a $20 price drop for standard NBN speed tiers, as well as cheaper 100 meg plus services, and the introduction of a $10 a month voice only option for customers who don't want internet access at all. NBN Co is currently holding a pricing inquiry with, it seems, pretty much every ISP singing the same tune at it.
The US-led Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance has called on technology firms to change their end-to-end encryption policies to ensure that law enforcement agencies can access encrypted communications, warning that failing to do so puts people at serious risk. Issuing a statement after a 2-day summit in London, the group called for tech companies to include mechanisms in the design of their encrypted products and services whereby governments, acting with appropriate legal authority, can obtain access to data in a readable and usable format. British Home Secretary backed the call, which also aligns with the Australian government's push for technology companies to offer ways to bypass encryption when required.
Samsung has announced a new Galaxy tablet, the Galaxy Tab S6, ahead of next week's expected launch of the Galaxy Note 10 phone. The Tab S6 is a 10.5-inch tablet with Samsung's S Pen stylus magnetically attached to it, as well as dual cameras, because taking photos with your tablet is somehow still a thing, but it's still a terrible idea. It's also got the choice of Samsung's One UI for Android or its DeX laptop-style interface. The Tab S6 will go on sale here in Australia from the 13th of September, with pricing starting at $1,099.
Google has sparked yet another fight with online publishers by updating the Chrome web browser to stop websites from detecting when visitors are using incognito mode. Some online publishers have taken to blocking visitors who are using incognito mode as it prevents the website from tracking the visitor's history. This sometimes lets the visitor bypass the number of free articles they can read before they hit the paywall. The latest version of Chrome is also another nail in the coffin for Adobe Flash. Instead of simply blocking Flash objects, Chrome now stops Flash from even loading unless users override this in their advanced browser settings. By the end of next year, Flash should be completely removed from Chrome according to the Chromium roadmap. So, Alex, it wouldn't be an episode of Vertical Hold if we didn't talk about the ongoing shenanigans of the NBN. What do we think about this call from all the telcos for NBN to change their pricing?
Look, it was pretty much the obvious conclusion that you could draw when they said, "Hey, what's wrong with NBN pricing?" That all the ISPs were going to go, "CVC's wrong with NBN pricing." What's really interesting here, though, is how public they're being about it, because they've made their submissions to NBN Co. NBN Co knows they've all said we hate the
Mm.
CVC pricing, but they're pretty much all either leaking to the media or, in the case of Telstra, announcing to the world, hey, we think the CVC pricing is wrong. And that's what's really kind of fascinating about this, because with Andy Penn coming out and saying, hey, this is what the NBN needs to be profitable for ISPs. And obviously, he's got Telstra's interests at heart. But with him publicly coming out and saying it, it's a PR campaign, it's a spin campaign. It's getting a point across to try and put more pressure on NBN Co. But of course, the real question is, especially in the medium term with the NBN build all but finished, whether or not that CVC pricing can be maintained. Seamus, do you think the ISPs have actually got a chance of getting NBN Co to reverse its long held CVC position?
I mean, it's pretty hard when they designed this price strategy right at the start, and it kind of even speaks to that whole issue of the way the government structured NBN in the first place to be this thing that was somehow, meant to be like the new version of what Telstra was when the government owned it in the first place. And but also they want it to be profitable in the long term so they could sell it off after they finish building it. But you're like, how do you build this thing that's meant to be a universal access system that some company one day might want to own and therefore try to make as much money as they can out of, when it's meant to be equal access for everybody who's trying to sell things on top of it? And as we're seeing there's companies just saying we're just not even bothering to sell the minimum price plans anymore because there's no money in it. Those kinds of things. I think that's where there are some of those critical aspects. If companies just straight up say we're not even going to sell that product anymore because we lose money every time we have like a minimum speed customer, then that's the sort of stuff that does do a good job of swaying some of that public PR and turning people around. And go, okay, yeah, there's something in this, and if it doesn't change, these companies also do get to go, we tried, guys, we tried.
But it really comes back to how they've screwed up with the multi-technology mix, because this whole system that
100%.
they put together may have worked in an environment where almost everybody got access to fiber to the premises. That therefore almost everybody got access to faster speeds and more reliable speeds, and we didn't have five little mini rollouts, all which had their own problems. And had we not been through that, then it might have worked. So when people are saying it's broken, it's only broken because they broke it.
I
Yeah.
disagree.
I'm sure that's not really, maybe there's probably a better way to explain it than it's broken because they broke it. But I think you get what I mean.
But I disagree. Not that I think that the multi technology mix isn't a headache of its
Alex
own
Kimman
making.
defends multi-technology
No,
mix.
no, no.
Footage at 11.
I'm not defending the MTM. The CVC pricing construct would still have been there if you had
True.
fiber. And the issue is that it does bulk out those prices. The point that Penn makes in his column, whether he wrote it or had it ghostwritten, was that um, moving forward, shifting forward, because of the CVC pricing, NBN prices are going to go up. They're already fairly high, and they're certainly a pain point for a lot of consumers, but they're also really, really high in world standards. He quoted an economic report which suggested they were the second highest in the world. Now, if we had the second best broadband in the world, yeah, I'd go for that. I'd be
Yeah.
quite happy with that. But we don't. We are tumbling way down the lists, and that's the multi technology mix's problem. The CVC problem is a different one, and it does make me wonder in the medium term, in the medium to long term, whether or not CVC charging might have to be dropped. But then you create a whole other raft of problems for NBN Co in the future in terms of paying for simple stuff like maintenance, let alone upgrades.
I think if you want to drop CVC, then we come back to that argument about should they just write off the cost of the NBN and wear it rather than what they're doing now, which is trying to keep it off the books because we're going to sell it when we're done. And no one wants to be the government that gave in and said, yeah, okay, we were wrong. We'll just pay for it ourselves. So that kind of leaves them between a rock and a hard place.
Look, and that always comes back to, that whole fight that we had, and people like us who did those kind of media arguments trying to explain why the change to the MTM version of the NBN was so bad. And that was, even in a purely capitalist sense, it was like, if they don't build the full fiber version of this, it will never be worth money to a company in future. The
Yep.
idea of selling it off was only going to work if in the year 2030, it was then hitting its stride as this beautiful full fiber network, and then has all the gigabit speeds and everything that comes with the fact that all you ever need to do is upgrade the endpoints rather than having to upgrade physical infrastructure
Yeah.
all over again. And instead, we've got this crappy system that is already starting to be outdated when they're not even quite finished it. And so, who wants to buy something that is just not even going to be useful another 10 years out?
So, Seamus, as we mentioned in the intro, you're fresh off the plane from the Fortnite World Cup, and we'll burn through the really obvious stuff. Esports are a thing. Gaming is bigger than Hollywood. Yes, people win millions of dollars. But
Yes, perfect.
yeah,
Well
thank you.
done.
I
Thanks for
figured
joining us. And next week,
yeah, I figured we'd get the obvious morning breakfast show stuff done, because I wanted to really talk to
weren't you
you.
going to slag off Dole Bludgers as well?
And yeah, you forgot to turn around at the very end and just say like, oh, I don't know about these shooting games though, because that's what happened to me the other morning.
Why'd somebody
Oh.
think of the children? Yeah, this is true.
Yeah.
I was getting there. I was getting there. Honest.
Okay.
But I figure you've got a much broader, frankly, a much more interesting story to tell, in terms of both what the experience of actually being at an event like that is like. Because whilst esports are a growing phenomenon here in Australia, they're not growing to the point where we're packing out 10,000 person stadia, are they?
Yeah, look. Well, look. I mean, when we have the Intel Extreme Masters event here in Australia, that is definitely, an event now that gets, I think, like over the course of 3 days, it crosses over the 10,000. But there's definitely many thousands every day, and they are wonderfully into it. There is something about that Counter Strike Go crowd as well, that they're super passionate. They sing like football fans. They've got that real sort of passion to it. But that's about as big as it gets here in Australia. Whereas, some of the biggest international events, absolutely, the finals for Dota and League of Legends, they will sell out major stadiums. I know Dota sold out Madison Square Garden a couple of years ago for their finals. And then, this event for Fortnite was at Arthur Ashe Stadium, which is the home of the US Open. And it wasn't. I think there's that tricky thing for them where it was technically a sellout, but it was because they were selling 3-day passes, and people don't necessarily turn up to all 3 days. So the stadium on any given day was not 100% full.
So obviously, Fortnite's been this huge kind of viral sensation of a game, and in one sense, the latest viral sensation of the game. You could make I think a reasonable argument for a certain age bracket that Fortnite replaced Minecraft, for example.
Yeah.
Does the Fortnite World Cup mean though that it's joined properly that tier of big esports games? You mentioned Counter Strike and Dota and so on. Has it made it there, and can it stay there, do you think?
Yeah, I really feel like this weekend proved that it deserves to be in that tier because and I mean it's hilarious, right? Like hardcore esports fans almost hate Fortnite as much as angry breakfast television presenters because they just decided, this isn't a real esport, this isn't a proper hardcore video game. I completely disagree with so much of that, but it's fascinating to see how these sorts of faction wars start to break out already.
So
But
Fortnite is the one-day cricket of e-games, or
look,
2020.
Fortnite is the 2020, that's for sure.
I'm going to
And yeah,
pretend I
look,
know what that means.
We'll explain it to you later.
So yeah, I really feel like going into this weekend, part of my feeling was that it might have felt like a bookend because it was the 2-year anniversary on the weekend as well of the launch of Fortnite, and it just kind of felt like maybe because there's been so much focus since April, everything was about the build up to this World Cup. The biggest kind of prize money ever was on the line. And I just wondered if it meant that, at the other side of it, people were thinking, oh, do I keep pushing hard but have to wait a whole next year until the next World Cup? I think the event itself, it absolutely sort of stood up. It was just a fantastic weekend of events. It presented so well as something you could watch on streams, and it kind of crossed over, 1 million concurrents on streams at different times across YouTube and Twitch. But yeah, I think the fact that they teased the fact that like tomorrow is when season 10 launches, or I think, well, Thursday here in Australia, August 1st in North America. Uh, and they've announced that they're going to have a whole new Fortnite Champions series, basically creating this weekly competitive environment that's going to mean that this kind of ongoing top level esport is going to start to be more available for fans to watch as well as for people who want to pursue it. Something that is like, millions of dollars sort of every few weeks. And that's something that's going to, I think, sustain it in a way that build up to the World Cup. If you had to wait until next year, it'd probably die off.
So looking at the way that people qualified to get into the Fortnite World Cup, to me was interesting because I've written a bit about esports and I can see a lot of synergies with traditional sports in the way that, well, we'll say cycling, for example. If you want to be on one of the big international esports team, you start locally, you get an Australian club, you work your way up, you get noticed on the international scene, and then you try to break into a big team. Um, and that seems to be how it is with your Dotas and your StarCrafts. But the way that people qualified for the Fortnite World Cup was different, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So there was 10 weeks of qualifying process. Every single week was essentially a separate qualifier. So that was, that window of time. You had to play basically 10 matches, and then you would score points through those 10 matches. And then at the end of that, the leaderboard would decide who had qualified from that particular week. And so,
But
if
when
you
you say
didn't make
you mean anybody in the world who wanted
literally
to play
anybody. So,
Fortnite.
so yeah,
Yeah,
40 million people participated in that qualification process for the 100 solo
that's a big
spots,
group
and
stage.
then the 50 duo spots.
Yeah.
Interesting that at the event, at a press conference, the kind of players even the players who had qualified, so they're not the ones with sour grapes, so going, oh, I wish it worked differently because I missed out. The guys who were actually there in the final, they were saying that what they would like for next year would be more of a process that sort of funnels people into that sort of final. So instead of just being like, oh, these 3 people qualified this week out of thousands trying to play, they were saying what might be better would be to say, in that first few weeks, it's like we work out who the top 10,000 players are. And then the next couple of weeks, those 10,000 get to kind of keep playing. And then we whittle it down to 1,000. And that process of kind of really trying to kind of improve the quality of play week to week. Because one of the things that they were pointing out was you could just get lucky during that process when it is, 40 million random players. You might get
Mm.
lucky and have, one particular match that you randomly get allocated to has like 100 of the worst other players in the world, and you just completely dominate. You score heaps of points, and then you get through that week. So an interesting little kind of issue there of having it so open, and they think it might be some kind of a gradual system of funneling it might be better.
Although the way that Carl Giersdorf, and I'm still not sure how to pronounce his actual gamer tag, and I'm sure you do know, but uh, the way that he won from in fact reading your write up was it was actually fairly clear that he was going to win the singles from I think like 2 or 3 matches in. He was that good.
Yeah, he was amazing. And so yeah, I've seen him interviewed by other people. It is Booger is how it's pronounced. And he said it was a nickname that his grandfather gave him when he was a really little kid. Apparently, literally, his grandfather used to just kind of call him like booger 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 type thing, and he laughed. So like literally type a baby name,
So
which
it's
is
not an homage to Revenge of the Nerds.
no. But I
That's
think
missed
it's so,
opportunity.
it's such a wholesome kind of thing where it's like, oh, his handle is because of his grandfather's nickname he gave him, which is really
That is
cute.
adorable.
But look, he even wasn't just. This is a fascinating bit that came out, and that, of course, that magic of hindsight, where it's like, oh, of course he was going to be the best. He actually placed first in week 1 of the North American qualifiers during that sort of online open process. So the guy who won was the guy who, in that very first week, when everybody is out there to try to make it, he's like, I dominated in the very first week of this whole process. Then I don't have to play in front of anybody until we get to the finals again. And then he completely dominated in the final. So his score was almost double the person who came second. Like that's how far ahead he was in the final scoring in the 6 match World Cup final. So a genuinely dominant display, really really impressive.
Do any of the big esports teams participate in Fortnite? Like, could you see it going down that same path of if you want to compete Fortnite in the world stage, you have to join a team, or do you think it really lends itself to being that standalone um,
Yeah, look, I
way of
feel I
choosing?
feel like I feel like part of what has caught the mainstream attention here as well is the fact that this is like two competitions happened on the weekend. There was a duos final and a solo final, but that idea of this kind of solo player being the champion of a game really seemed to be part of what captured that mainstream attention. You know, they didn't have to explain who members of a team were or who a
Yeah,
team was. It was about this one guy. And they basically ignored the duos winners and just focused on that idea of this one kid just won $3 million. It's his story. Let's tell his story. You know, isn't that cool? So yeah, a lot of the big esports teams do have a bunch of Fortnite players. There was actually a little window of time there where it kind of got out of control in that I think one of the big teams literally had about 30 players that they signed to their team. And they pretty much signed them almost based on who was at the front of the queue to go to a physical event where it was just a case of queuing up the day before and the winners would win X amount of money. It was like they just went, hey, if we sign everybody up, then we basically will our team will win and get a share of the prize pool. So that some of that got out of control, but now there is a mix where they might have 3 or 4 on the higher end, or just 1 or 2 sort of on the lower end. But there is that mix of teams bringing in that kind of squad to support each other
yeah.
and yeah, play duos or solos and things like that.
Just, having spent 3 weeks watching the Tour de France, it's amazing to think that you could come out of nowhere and win the yellow jersey. Like you don't. That's not the way cycling, for example, works. You've got to work your way up. You don't come out of nowhere to win Wimbledon, but you can literally come out of nowhere to win the Fortnite World Cup and win the same kind of money.
Yeah, and look, yeah, Booger is on a team. It's a small team, but his team Sentinels, it's a real team out there, and so he has a little bit of that support around him as well.
Seamus, I know I mentioned this to you, in fact, on social media earlier. The other side of this story that interests me, though, is the competitors are quite young. I mean, it's a game which has had a very passionate young gamer base to it, and the pressure on them, especially if you've just won $3 million, must be intense in that traditional, I suppose, sporting sense. And it's very weird for me to be talking about sports on this show. But how well do you think they're ready to handle that? I mean, there's so much evidence in traditional sports of you know parents embezzling money or people not being willing or ready to handle the pressure and the fame and burning out. How well do you think they're mentally prepared? How well do you think they're coached to handle all of the baggage that comes with winning that kind of money, with winning that kind of world championship?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be a mixed bag. In that the mix of stories I heard, a lot of the stories that I heard from players there at the event was about the fact that their parents were really supportive. There was one kid who was a really big streamer now as well. He's like, I think his name is just Benjamin Fish, but he goes by Benji Fishy. And he is actually now homeschooled by his parents because they saw like he was having this success as a personality as well as a streamer, but he was also great competitively, and but he was starting to struggle with school because of the kind of schedule he wanted to be able to keep to play, which was like late night playing against North American opponents and things to kind of play against the best because he's a British kid. um, and yeah, his parents took that move and went, you know what, yeah, we'll set you up to homeschool you at the right times of day that suits this, and we'll support you in this in kind of that same way that you're like, if some kid was pursuing gymnastics or swimming or dance or something where it's like, this is what I want to do, then some parents will do everything in their power to kind of help them pursue that in that way. So I think that was interesting. But I think, yeah, the flip side of that is I know there was another kid who he was part of the team that came second in duos. And he basically admitted that, his mum just basically hates what he does because he just disappears into his room and like plays for 8 hours a day type thing. And it was the sort of thing where you go, well, it's one thing to be able to turn around and go, haha, look what I just did. Let me prove to you that it's all been worthwhile. But there's a dynamic there of going, well, yeah, if he's not part of a team and he's in an unstructured way, just playing all the time, it's like that's not actually the way to really sort of start treating yourself as an athlete in that sense of, of having your, are you sleeping properly? Are you doing all those things that helps your mind to be able to do this stuff, to be at the top of your game? So that's the bad example. But a lot of the good examples were out there. Another great example was a player who said when he finished high school last year, his parents basically said, look, we'll give you essentially gap year style. They were like, you've got this year where just you can focus on pursuing this and see how you go. And he decided that his magic number was going to be, can I make as much money as my dad makes as a salary? And he was like, so anyway, a month later, I'd made that.
That's got to sting. As a father of two, I'm saying that's got to sting.
Yeah, it's like
until you realize they're too young to have a bank account and you've got to sign the checks.
True.
But it's definitely complicated for a lot of this stuff, and I think, I definitely want to see, and I think this is where the better style of mainstream reporting is important for people to just try to understand that, your kid might be able to pursue this, but also just generically letting them disappear into their room to play games all the time isn't going to turn them into an esports pro, no matter how many edge case examples we might get where that's literally what happened.
So you're saying that Adams left his run as Fortnite World Champ just a little bit late?
Look, if he wants to join you at your Bubble World Championship, then maybe there's something available there. But there certainly seems to be that aspect as well. And this is where in the whole it's not really a sport. It's like when there is an aspect of people genuinely aging out of having the reflexes to do this stuff at this kind of level, there has to be something in it when it comes to that whole idea of this is about physical and eye hand type skills that fade as you get older. So yes, I'm sorry, Adam, it's probably too late.
I'll get there. I'll keep training for the Galaga World Championships.
That's the spirit.
So, Alex, it's Sims Smash again. He's ripped off the shirt. He's bulged up. Sims is going for the big ones. Facebook, Google, Smash. What's happening?
Yeah, so the ACCC put out its Digital Platforms Inquiry report last week. And as you say, it seems like a Sims Smash scenario.
He's gone the full Luferino, I think.
Well, except that he might be taking on Thanos in this case. Because he's going after as you said, he's going after the really big players. The Digital Platforms report made a total of 23 recommendations of how we could regulate or monitor or change the behavior of some of the biggest players in the internet space. And we're talking here of Google, of Facebook, of Netflix. And I mean, there's an awful lot to get through. We could talk through it all, but we would be here for about the next 6 months, I think. And I suspect Seamus's jet lag will kick in before we'd finish. So I just wanted to kind of kick through on just a few small ones and a few bigger ones, because there's some stuff which is just, I think, generally pro-consumer and not the worst idea. Stuff like choices on search engines, on devices, something like that they've already got in certain European markets, and whether or not you'd have Google as the default or a choice or something else, again, it's still a bit up in the air because it's all in recommendation phase. But then there's an awful lot on the power over media that Google especially has, and the way that that's actually impacted the local news scene.
So, Seamus, the three of us have seen the impact that the internet has had on the Australian media in the last decade or two. What do you think about the recommendations talk of things like, tax deductions and subsidies for producing journalism?
It all sounds really nice. How this stuff ever really there's always that element where you go Tiger, and then not really much kind of gets changed because the big international people go, now how are you going to make us do that? Or they do the things that are kind of easy for them to do, and they'll spend more money on lobbyists than actually the amount of money that might have been required to have to change anything. So there's so much of this sort of back and forth that means I'm in no way, feeling like this is really going to be a cause for change, particularly those kinds of tax deductions and things. I think, as someone and like yourselves making this kind of a show, with my own podcasts and efforts with my own websites, you sort of think, is there going to be a way for me to sort of take advantage of some of these elements so that we can have a more diverse media landscape, or is it just that Nine, now that it owns Fairfax, and News, they just kind of find a way to absorb all of that supposedly available funding that might help to sort of produce new things, and it's really just another kickback to the major players,
Yeah.
without really promoting anything that helps to kind of expand the media market.
Do you think it falls within the ACCC scope to be worried about journalism in the country? I'm not saying it's not an issue. I'm just saying, is it an issue that the ACCC should be sticking its nose into?
Yeah, look, I mean, not really. Apart from when things like the Fairfax Nine merger sort of stuff happens, and
Oh,
you
that's a bit
think,
different. Yeah, that's a merger. Yeah.
yeah,
But in terms of, whether someone like Google or Facebook has more power than Fairfax or News Limited, is that really Rod Sims' problem, or is that just a market issue? They haven't actually done anything wrong. They're not breaking the law. They're just, bloody big.
well, I mean, right? That's the classic question of, if what they're doing isn't breaking the law, then is there something wrong with the law? That
Yeah.
that is definitely, I think, a valid discussion point, because God knows there's plenty of corporate type stuff where, they're able to just wave their hands and go, I mean, we're not technically breaking any laws. And yeah, but as our politicians love to talk about the pub test, there's plenty of
Hmm.
things they get up to where you go, nobody thinks that's okay. Why is this legal? So, same with here. I think the fact that they have like Google and Facebook have soaked up so much of the advertising revenues. All of the major marketing companies now are spending so much of their money through Google and Facebook, and these two companies aren't really paying taxes in the local market. And there's so many aspects to that where you think, okay, if all of the money is disappearing out of the country and it is hurting the media landscape, there are competitive questions here, and that's certainly where ACCC should be involved.
And there are regulations on the existing media entities that don't apply to Google or Facebook, but they
Yeah.
do some of that kind of curation. I mean, you could argue that a search result is a curation, for example, for someone finding stuff. But there's more obvious stuff like Google News, for example, which obviously curates how that content is presented to people. There's even suggestions within the report, and this one I found really interesting, that uh, companies like Netflix and Google via YouTube should be compelled to meet Australian content quota laws.
I'm silently shaking my head. I don't know. Is everyone else silently shaking their heads as well? That seems to me like a bridge too far.
Yeah, like it's just one of those things where you sort of think, yeah, how do we look? Yeah, we don't even do a good job of it with the local,
Hmm.
media out. I know, like technically, but like when all of the local content nowadays is essentially just reality TV shows, and they rate their pants off, so clearly people are enjoying that. But I'd like to see more content that is local and might be more relevant than 1 week after it was made. That'd be
But I think this has
nice.
been, this has been the problem, and why those laws, which were in some cases they're 40-plus-year-old laws,
Yeah.
dealing with a time when we had, maybe one or two digital, not digital, sorry, one or two linear analog channels you could choose from, and people were watching at a linear basis. And the commercial channels, especially, just wanted to buy really cheap American programming. And there was a decent, both financial in terms of supporting the local industry and cultural argument to be made. We just don't watch that way anymore. But there is, I think, still a cultural argument in favor of it. And but at the same time, it's a very, very difficult balance. I have no idea how you'd compel a Netflix to say, right, well, 30% of your content's got to be Australian. They'd just they'd laugh all the way out of town. Well, folks, that's just about it for another fine episode of Vertical Hold. What do you think? Is the NBN stuck in a position where it should offer cheaper prices, but it can't, or it shouldn't offer cheaper prices? Are you in training to become the next Fortnite World Champion, or indeed the next Bubble Bubble World Champion? And should the ACCC be regulating Google and Facebook? Let us know by sending your feedback via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Seamus for joining us for the show.
Thank you very much. I'm off to turn on my montage music so I can start becoming the next Fortnite World Cup wannabe. Not champion, just wannabe.
While we punch the side of beef and run up and downstairs, thanks everyone for listening. Like I say, we really appreciate it when you give us a shout out, leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, and help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by CASA Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market.
And with that,
All
we
right.
have our audio grab for our new version of Super Seamus
It's
Brothers.
me, Seamus.
Yes.